In a letter to the Marquis de Lafayette on May 10, 1786, George Washington says, "It is one of the evils of democratical governments, that the people, not always seeing and frequently misled, must often feel before they can act right, but then evils of this nature seldom fail to work their own cure." On September 24, 2015, before a joint session of the U.S. Congress, of which 1/3 were Roman Catholic, and before 6 out of 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices, who were also Roman Catholic, Pope Francis said this.
Today, I would like not only to address you, but through you, the entire people of the United States.
Before making this statement, Pope Francis used a relief of Moses in the gallery of the United States Congressional Chamber, saying,
"Yours is a walk which makes me reflect in 2 ways on the figure of Moses. On the one hand, the patriarch and lawgiver of the people of Israel symbolizes the need of people to keep alive their sense of unity by means of just legislation. On the other, the figure of Moses leads us directly to God, and thus to the transcendent dignity of the human being. Moses provides us with a good synthesis of a work. We are asked to protect, by means of the law, the image and likeness fashioned by God on every human life. Today, I would like not only to address you, but through you, the entire people of the United States.
Our liberty, through our Constitution, is a governing provision for freedom of activity. And one thing that I have learned about the usage of symbols by the United States, they are symbols of national freedom governed by national liberty, according to its fundamental nature. Although there are images of gods and goddesses in the U.S. Capitol, no citizen is bound to any one as a required public observance, nor to any private liberty and freedom, such as any religious or social groups or organizations with their own rules, or bylaws, and policies to govern their freedom of activity. Yet, during the address before the joint session of Congress, Pope Francis is identifying himself with Moses, as the lawgiver of the people, in order to keep alive their sense of unity by means of just legislation through his common good message of subsidiarity, solidarity, and fraternity of nations, states, organizations, and peoples under his Vatican City-State system. Also, when he said that Moses leads us directly to God, and thus to the transcendent dignity of the human being, he means himself, as other popes, attaining to transcendent dignity or godhood, notably through metaphysics and theology, and as one who fathers nations and states under his system. Accordingly, he calls Congress to protect, by means of the law, the image and likeness fashioned by God on every human life. This includes himself as the vicar of Christ, the Son of God. In other words, he claims that God fashioned him also in his image and likeness, yet, as the substitute of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in power and authority. But, his pursuit to include the private liberty of his religious political city-state system as a son of this continent, conflicts with national sovereignty and the provisions of national liberty. Because, through it, he pursues sovereignty over the United States of America through the integral city-state system of the vicariate of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The integral system of the Vatican is the power and authority of the pontifical God King of Rome over the world as the vicar, that is to say, substitute of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. His power is religious and political, and his authority is ecclesiastical and civil. This absolute sovereign power and authority over nations, states, organizations, and peoples is through his canon laws and other laws. The Pope wants to fully restore his temporal sovereignty lost by the 18th century French Revolution, and expand it in the New World with the protection of the United States of America as one of his papal states. This is his pursuit for the common good. In the book, Star of the West, by Anna Ella Carroll, the Roman Catholic Church says, "We want to make Rome the District of Columbia for all Christendom, to make Rome the District of Columbia for the whole world, and the Pope the interpreter of the Constitution of the United States." The Macmillan design depicts the United States federal government as the protector and enforcer of the civil and ecclesiastical authority of the Pope of Rome, seated on his papal throne over the assassinated body of President Abraham Lincoln, as if the rival successor to the liberty of this nation. This depicts an act of treason against the government of the United States of America. Papal intrigue delineated by street planning was completed in 1956, which shows the Pope of Rome seated upon his papal throne over the assassinated body of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. The Pope faces the soldiers' home of the U.S. Civil War, and the cottage where President Lincoln stayed during the summer months and received war correspondence, now called President Lincoln's Cottage. The tomb of Mary Surratt, a devout Roman Catholic, who was one of the conspirators in the assassination of President Lincoln, is behind the papal throne. Aspects of the Derringer pistol used in the assassination is delineated at Fort Lincoln Park, which was once a reformatory school. The Virgin Patroness for the United States of America, one with the papal image, lifts away the papacy's heel. If the graphic was turned upside down, it appears that the papacy was given birth from the heart of the Virgin. This image shows a closer view of the Derringer pistol in the top left corner. Also, the distinguished hairstyle of President Lincoln is delineated. The bottom center of the image delineates his goatee, and his hair is parted on the left side of his head, and the assassination wound in the back of his head on the left side is also delineated. In the book, Star of the West, by Anna Ella Carroll, she says that the papacy lays his curse and his claim on all the civil and religious rights of man, and that he claims jurisdiction over armies, navies, seas, and lands. Google Map shows 3 major hospitals of the nation's capital city are within the mitre and crown of the papal power of Rome. They are MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital, Veterans Affairs Medical Center, and Children's Hospital and Children's National Medical Center. And Google Map shows the papal power of Rome grimacing with the wink of the evil eye, the eye of malice. The 1983 revised canon law of the Roman Catholic Church says in Canon 1369 and Canon 1373 that a person who in a public show or speech, in published writing, or in other uses of the instruments of social communication utters blasphemy, gravely injures good morals, expresses insults, or excites hatred or contempt against religion or the Church is to be punished with a just penalty. A person who publicly incites among subjects animosities or hatred against the apostolic see or an ordinary because of some act of power or ecclesiastical ministry or provokes subjects to disobey them is to be punished by an interdict or other just penalties. Therefore, according to this law of the polis or Vatican City, if any disagrees that the Pope is Vicar of Christ, that is to say, the substitute of Christ, it is blasphemy and punishable, or if someone speaks out against the act of an ordinary, that is to say, an inquisitioner, which causes the subjects of the monarch of Rome to disobey the apostolic see or an ordinary, it is punishable if the Pope obtains civil power through a nation's civil laws, which is the nature of his temporal sovereignty that he would fully restore in the Old World, and expand against the New World for its new order of the ages. During the start of the Protestant Reformation, the Roman Catholic Council of Trent in 1563 says that the Roman Catholic monarchical jurisdictions and dominions are the possessions of the Roman Church, that a monarchy can be excommunicated and deprived of their jurisdiction or dominion, which they hold of the Church. Also, the Council admonishes secular princes of their duty, trusting that they, as Catholics, whom God hath willed to be the protectors of holy faith and church, will grant that to the church her own right be restored. And that officers, or inferior magistrates of princes render, conjointly with the princes themselves, due observance to the sacred constitutions of sovereign pontiffs and of councils. The council has ordained therefore, and enjoins, that the sacred canons, and all the general councils, as also all other apostolic ordinances, published in favor of ecclesiastical persons, of the liberty of the Church, and against the violators thereof, all which it also renews by this present decree, be exactly observed by all men. And it admonishes the emperor, kings, republics, princes, and all in each of whatsoever state and dignity they be, that, the more bountifully they are adorned with temporal goods, and with power over others, the more religiously should they respect whatsoever is of ecclesiastical right, as belonging especially to God, and as being under the cover of His protection. The 1983 Revised Canon Law of the Roman Catholic Church says, a person who has legislative power can also issue penal laws, within the limits of his competence by reason of territory or of persons. Moreover, he can by his own laws also strengthen with an appropriate penalty a divine law or an ecclesiastical law issued by a higher authority. Insofar as possible, diocesan bishops are to take care that if penal laws must be issued, they are uniform in the same city or region. Penalties are to be established only insofar as they are truly necessary to provide more suitably for ecclesiastical discipline. In other words, the canon laws from the universal sphere of the polis or Vatican city-state sovereignty of Roman Catholicism says to make laws that will condition a society under her ecclesiastical discipline. Also in the writings of George Washington, it says, that every citizen would take pride in the name of an American, and act as if he felt the importance of the character, by considering, that we ourselves are now a distinct nation, the dignity of which will be absorbed, if not annihilated, if we enlist ourselves, farther than our obligations may require, under the banners of any other nation whatsoever. This is not the first time that the Pope of Rome has spoken through one of the branches of our government. On May 2, 1984, while President Reagan was in office, Pope John Paul II spoke the following in his address in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Mr. President, I thank you for your kind welcome on my arrival, and I wish to reaffirm through you my friendship and esteem for all the citizens of your great nation.
Before Roman Catholicism existed as a distinct religion, that is to say, before the Bishop of Rome had temporal sovereignty, in the 6th century, Emperor Justinian I gave the Catholic, universal, Christian Church ecclesiastical authority over the whole world in the 119th novel of the Codex Novels of Corpus Juris Civilis, in which the 5 worldwide divisions are under 5 patriarchates or bishops of Christianity, and the 5th division is given to the Bishop of Rome, which contains in itself alone all the West. In a broader scope, this includes North America and the Western Hemisphere. And the Pope is titled, President of the Church of the West. It is notable that not only people and organizations, but nations and states also make up the church or body of the Pope of Rome. This is significant because the Pope of Rome, who is head of the Universal Church of Rome, is also the absolute head over his Vatican City-State's 3 branches of government, which are also executive, legislative, and judicial. Yet, according to the Federalist on re-election of a U.S. president, the administration of government, in its largest sense, comprehends all the operations of the body politic, whether legislative, executive, or judiciary. Nevertheless, this is a natural right with separation of powers, according to the laws of nature and of nature's God, and also the rectitude of intentions. The separation of powers was determined despite even known spiritual capability and any high morals because, he says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Because of the political pursuits of the monarchs of Rome through intrigue, subtle subversion, and treason, the monarchs of Rome and those who give allegiance to the Roman monarchical integral system cannot be thought of as sincere and considerate friends of republican government, a proper federal system. They have to be a hateful opponent. There must be enmity against our republican government and our proper federal system, because it is founded to protect against the Pope's system of religious and political sovereignty. Therefore, our government would have to be made as a headless trunk, ineffective, for the Pope's integral system of sovereignty to succeed. This success is pursued by metaphysics. By the potentiality of intrigue against liberty and opportunity through forces of people and organizations in society with a common belief in the system of the Pope, who operate in a universal of society and government, to bring about the actuality of papal states. In light of the Great Seal of the United States of America, it is nascent that the Founding Fathers' rectitude of intention in 1789, the start of the French Revolution, and 9 years before the deadly wound to the papacy by imprisoning and exiling Pope Pius VI, was to establish a nation progressive in liberty, both civil and religious for the diverse citizens and people, distinguished and opposed to the old world of political tyranny and religious persecution. Accordingly, the phrases of our Great Seal were written in Latin, which is contrary to the strength of papal power and claim of sovereignty. They say, "Annuit coeptis. Providence has favored our undertakings. Nuis ordo seclorum. New order of the ages. E pluribus unum. Out of many one." An advocate for papal temporal sovereignty during the U.S. Civil War says of its development, "The civil sovereignty of the popes was gradually produced by the operation itself of time, along with all the other new institutions of Christian culture, along with the refinement of manners, with the amelioration and better definition of the relations between the various portions of society, with the birth of the different political states, and the altered conditions of society rendered it indispensable to the exercise of the pontifical power, to the peace and tranquility of Catholic nations." In consideration of the Roman Catholics' worldwide integration through globalization. What is the Church's newest institution of Christian culture? It is the ecumenical movement of Vatican II. What is the Church's refinement of manners? It is dialogue with denominations of professed Christians. What is the Church's amelioration and better definition of the relations between the various portions of society? A global family open to transcendence and to properly understand the transcendent dignity of man, the confounding of metaphysics and theology, and the proper relations in being one global family, where the Pope is the head as father of princes and kings, ruler of the world, vicar of our Savior on earth. What is the intended result? It is intended to result in the birth of the different political states, through political pressures for subsidiarity and solidarity under the Vatican City-State political religious system by stronger fraternal nations, yet, it is expected that there will be altered conditions of society, caused by peoples and nations, who are dissenters, which would render the civil sovereignty of the popes indispensable to the exercise of the pontifical power for the peace and tranquility of Catholic nations. Through its civil laws, which would enforce his religious dictates. Accordingly, Benedict XVI says, "A new trajectory of thinking is needed in order to arrive at a better understanding of the implications of our being one family. Interaction among the peoples of the world calls us to embark upon this new trajectory, so that integration can signify solidarity rather than marginalization. Thinking of this kind requires a deeper critical evaluation of the category of relation. This is a task that cannot be undertaken by the social sciences alone, insofar as the contribution of disciplines such as metaphysics and theology is needed if man's transcendent dignity is to be properly understood." What is trajectory? Trajectory explains the force relevant to the travel distance of an object towards a target or goal affected by gravitational pull throughout the course traveled. As an object loses force, the gravitational pull downward is greater. Therefore, based on longer distances, in order to reach the object one must aim higher, which will cause it to gravitate down upon the target or goal. Thereby, the trajectory of thinking is no more than a government, which is free and independent in resources and power with civil and religious liberty for a diverse citizenry, becoming a transient or transitional liberty by circumstances that humble its thoughts to arrive at a better understanding of the implications of our being one family. What is implied in being one family? Understanding the implications of being one family is that the papacy is a universal religious political system and that integration is based on subsidiarity and solidarity, not necessarily fraternity. This is more than one humbling one's thoughts. This means to be humiliated by the power of solidarity, to disappoint the options of a self-sufficient nation by oppression when disagreeable with the pursuit of global solidarity. The target aimed for or to arrive at by trajectory is a restored papal city-state sovereignty over the Old World and expansion in the New World. Trajectory of thinking towards being one family begins with a high aim of national socio-economic interest, which transcends or descends by the gravitational pull of global socio-economic interests for the benefits of solidarity, the fruit of globalization, which is the concert of integrated nations, trajected under the true world political authority, who is also the manager of the global economy. This is one of four images, which according to Christianity, naturally depict Michael the Archangel standing above the whirlwind or fear of Jehovah. This is similar in appearance and growth to butternut squash. Gourds are also used to make musical instruments. These two youthful angels are depicted as upholding the triple crown of the Pope. And they may be depicted as young adults or childlike in other art as the angels who appeared at the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The two angels are depicted as childlike, children of wisdom. In 1917, before World War I ended, the highest mountain peak in Alaska named Denali was renamed Mount McKinley after William McKinley, the last of the Union officers, who served as U.S. President. President William McKinley, a brevet major in the Union Army, resisted European pressures to let Pope Leo XIII mediate and work out an armistice during the Easter season between menacing Spain and its colony, Cuba. Instead, after a U.S. battleship, the USS Maine, patrolling in the Havana harbor sank by a mine explosion on February 15, 1898, the U.S. decidedly went to war against Spain on April 25, 1898, and gave Cuba independence. The year 1898 is significant. It was 100 years after France invaded Rome in 1798 and demanded Pope Pius VI to renounce his temporal sovereignty, and declared Papal Rome a republic, and arrested and exiled Pius VI to France, where he died a year later, while the United States emerged as an independent sovereign nation with religious liberty in its Bill of Rights on December 15, 1791. And in 1798, the Great Seal of the United States was formed, and it was written in Latin, the language of Rome. Therefore, it is evident that the papacy sought to heal itself from the loss of its power as a monarchical government in 1798. For exactly 100 years to the day that Rome was declared a republic in 1798, on February 15, 1898, the Monroe Doctrine of 1823 in behalf of our republican system was challenged, and the peace, safety, and happiness of the Republic of the United States was threatened by the European power, the Roman Catholic monarchy of Spain, which undermined the liberty of the United States. Furthermore, European nations pressured the United States to look to the papal monarchy of Rome for an undecisive armistice as a solution between Spain and Cuba. When Pope John Paul II visited the White House on October 6, 1979, President Jimmy Carter sounded sincere and emphatic about religious liberty. Also, President Carter was an influence on relations between the Pope and Israel. And notably, President Carter is documented as saying in shorthand, "I feel lonely." Not catastrophe for Pope to be embarrassed. Pope John Paul II supported President Ronald Reagan in his fight against communism, and thereby, President Reagan was in solidarity with the Vatican. Under President Reagan, the U.S. Congress recognized the papacy and established full diplomatic ties in 1984 by an ambassador from Rome. President Reagan did not speak against the dignity of the papacy, which is his pursuit of temporal sovereignty. And in the speech in Fairbanks, Alaska, he seemed to implicitly express an equal right to pursue this dignity. Also, he spoke of the right to religious liberty according to this nation. And Pope John Paul II said there was mutual respect between them, although there were differences. After a meeting with Pope Francis in March 2014 on issues of foreign policy, climate, and discrimination, which included a secret meeting with the Papacy of Rome about the Pope's desired mediation between the U.S. and Cuba, the first African-American U.S. President, Barack Obama, showed that he upheld the hand of Pope Francis. Then, the following year, he announced a name change to Mount McKinley on August 30, 2015, which is the highest mountain peak of North America in Alaska. This name change was 7 days before the anniversary of the assassination of President McKinley in 1901 by a Polish anarchist named Leon F. Czolgosz, the son of Roman Catholic parents. Nevertheless, the decision of President McKinley not to accept the Pope's peace solution through mediation, one of his papal powers, despite European pressures of solidarity on the anniversary of the loss of his monarchy to a republic, is a milestone, a symbolic peak of the independence and freedom of the sovereignty of the United States of America's republican form of democracy in the Western Hemisphere. According to a speech of allegiance by Abraham Lincoln in 1837, on the perpetuation of our political institutions, U.S. citizens are under the government of a system of political institutions conducing more essentially to the ends of civil and religious liberty than any of which the history of former times tells us. This name change is an example of what Pope Benedict XVI calls a new trajectory of thinking, which he says is needed in order to arrive at a better understanding of the implications of our being one family. What appears to be a great political move in restoring relations with Cuba through papal mediation, seemingly a progression of cooperation in solidarity, was really a trajectory aiming toward subsidiarity according to the worldwide integration movement of Roman Catholicism. And the Pope spoke in subtle and subversive ways to the U.S. Congress and the people about its responsibility as a papal state. The worldwide concerted effort of Roman Catholics is to bring all peoples, organizations, churches and nations, all that pertaining to life and government under the city-state sovereignty of the papacy by subsidiarity, solidarity, and fraternity. Thereby, where the papacy would obtain strength by some resourceful papal states, these under subsidiarity, solidarity, and fraternity will impose spiritual and political pressures on other states or nations, even resourceful nations, and peoples to further the pursuits of the Church of Rome through the Vatican city-state system. Thereby, the institutions of liberty and rights of people in respective nations are subject to people, who are globalized and taught to operate in behalf of the polis. Therefore, naturally any dissenting voice in the polis will be met with injustice. Naturally, dissenters will be subject to abuses and discriminations through denying and disparaging rights for the sake of subduing peoples and institutions of nations and states under the polis. This effort is spiritual and natural, operating as forces in a universal of metaphysics to bring about the actuality of a papal state. What makes a difference? People in positions of responsibility, who will uphold and enforce human and civil rights, and who will inform us about our rights.